everything's fine on 93.9 Dublin South FM.
We are living through a moment of fast-moving global events, and few have been as unsettling or as far-reaching as the disclosures emerging from the Epstein files. In this unfolding global storm, India appears not merely as a distant observer, but as one of the most consequential affected countries, entangled in what increasingly looks like a vast web of questionable associations, opaque dealings, and potential blackmail. Economically, India has been seriously affected by the disclosures of Epstein files. Not how it is affecting the politicians, but now we know the great losses, the manipulations that has happened in dealings of Indian government. At the center of this moment lies India's evolving relationship with United States, a relationship now shaped by a trade deal. In 2025, Indian merchandise exports to United States stood at approximately $86 billion, making the US India's single largest export destination. India ran a trade surplus of over $41 billion that year, up from $35 billion in 2023. Total bilateral trade between India and US touched nearly $131 billion. Numbers that underline just how economically weighty this relationship between the two countries is. And yet, under this new trade agreement announced just a couple of days ago, Indian exports of US now faces tariff of around 18%. It was 25%, now it is 18%. While many American goods entering India will attract 0% tariff. This also includes, surprise, surprise, agriculture products. Despite repeated public assurance by none other than Prime Minister Modi that India would never open its agricultural markets because doing so would devastate Indian farmers, who are the backbone of the Indian economy, not from today, but ever since India has came into being. India is home to nearly 140 million farmers and agricultural support close to half of country's population. Yet, in 2025 alone, US agricultural export to India surged by 34%, rising from $2 billion to roughly $3 billion. By contrast, have a look at this one. Indian agricultural exports to US, including rice and shrimps, grew by only 5% to about $6 billion. Meanwhile, several Indian export sectors, textile, leather goods, gems and jewelry, they saw double-digit decline in volume since last year because of the tariff, with some categories that is hurting our small and medium businesses as much as 40 to 60% just because of Trump tariff pressure. So is this trade deal made under tariff pressure by manipulation? This trade realignment, if you refer, this was sold domestically in India as a strategic reset, but its costs were borne quietly by our poor farmers, by the small workers, small businesses, and small producers. And while international media outlets from United States to Europe have saturated their coverage with forensic examination of Epstein files, the Indian media, the Godi media response have been at best. There has been only cursory mentions, some fleeting headlines, and a complete absence of sustained scrutiny, particularly when Indian political figures like Prime Minister Modi, corporate powers like Anil Ambani, Hardeep Puri, and the state itself are being implicated. Hardeep Puri was or is in finance ministry. He is an ex-foreign service diplomat, but now has joined BJP. It is this silence that an older controversy returns with renewed force, the Rafael fighter jet deal. If you remember, let me recap. In 2016, India signed a government-to-government contract with France to purchase 36 Dassault Rafale aircraft for approximately 7.8 billion euros, that is about 60,000 crore Indian rupees. Now this deal included weapon systems, logistic supports, and India began receiving those aircraft from 2019 onwards. But this deal marked a dramatic shift from the earlier negotiations that the armed forces and the Indian government were making with France in year 2007 under Prime Minister then, Mr. Manmohan Singh. India had then been negotiating, if you remember, 126 aircrafts instead of what we got now as 36, with an approximate unit cost of 700 crores per unit, per aircraft. Although this contract was never finalized, but the structure was transparent, competitive, and institutional. Everybody was involved. But in 2016 deal, the number of 126 aircrafts was reduced to 36 only, while the effective unit cost rose to estimated 1600 crores per aircraft. And more troubling now comes in, the maintenance contract to these aircrafts was not awarded to Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, our own taxpayer-funded public sector company with decades of experience, but this contract of maintenance goes to Reliance Defence. This is a private firm incorporated only just a few weeks before the deal, and of course, Reliance Defence does not have any prior experience in defence manufacturing or maintenance. At the time, this decision defied logic, isn't it? And raised unanswered questions. Today, these questions return, sharpened by new claims emerging from the Epstein files. According to the disclosures in Epstein files, Anil Ambani allegedly functioned as a broker within a nexus involving Donald Trump, Narendra Modi, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, and his son-in-law as intermediary as Jared Kushner, alongside with other political inner circles like Steve Bannon. Now, Steve Bannon is again convicted. Jeffrey Epstein was the person who was connecting these threads. He was at the time already convicted. The Epstein files reportedly suggest that a broader geopolitical understanding was in play, possibly involving India's recalibration of diplomacy towards Israel, encouraged or facilitated at the behest of Donald Trump. And this understanding, it is claimed, exerted undue pressure on the Rafael deal, alerting its structure, its partner, and its priorities towards Anil Ambani. And the consequence of this shift became very clear after a decade here in 2025 and 26. Now, the consequence of that deal 10 years ago comes in May of 2025 during a 4-day intense confrontation with Pakistan called Operation Sindoor. India's Air Force strategy, heavily centered around Rafael aircrafts, they were tested in real combat for the first time. Open source reports and foreign analysis, including European media, of course Donald Trump also making claims, indicate that at least one Rafael aircraft was shot and India lost 6 Rafael aircrafts, marking the first confirmed combat loss of the platform. Now, this claim that India lost up to 8 fighter jets have circulated widely, and crucially, they have not been categorically denied even by the top senior military figures of Indian Armed Forces. And this raises a grave question whether India's defense preparedness and procurement choices was compromised by opaque decision-making, external pressures, and non-institutional influence. Following the Rafael deal in 2017, if you remember, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi became the first Indian Prime Minister to visit Israel. And this marked a historic break from decades, or for that matter ever, the Indian diplomatic tradition, which sought to balance strategic interest with principled commitment to non-alignment and fight against injustice. India had been an advocate for vulnerable population even at the economic cost. It was a principled stance, even during the times of BJP government Atal Bihari Vajpayee was heading. So in this diplomatic realignment, why did it happen? Because Anil Ambani is alleged to have played a pivotal role along with Jeffrey Epstein, facilitating not only the Israel visit, but subsequent defense engagements up to $700 million and high-level meetings involving United States, including Prime Minister Modi and Donald Trump. According to Epstein files, Epstein himself acknowledged that the Indian Prime Minister's office largely complied with the strategic framework envisioned by Trump and that the anticipated deals were executed accordingly. What is striking is who was missing from this process. India's professional diplomatic machinery, Ministry of External Affairs, the most educated, going through the rigor of passing the UPSC exams, the Indian Foreign Service, the ambassadors who have gone through the experience of geopolitics, and of course the institutional planners like the Indian Armed Forces. They all have been sidelined. They all appear to be sitting on the benches. Instead, shadow channels have emerged, run by convicted. And if the email records cited in the Epstein files are to be believed, the central figure to those channels as of now were Anil Ambani, Jeffrey Epstein, Hardeep Puri, and others. So what this leads us is the most disturbing question of all. Did this mode of deal-making compromise India's national security by placing it directly or indirectly, as we may term it, in the orbit of convicted criminals? Why has Parliament not held a full, transparent debate on Anil Ambani's role in one of India's most sensitive defense procurement? These questions grow darker when placed alongside reports that Anil Ambani at one point faced the prospect of imprisonment over unpaid dues to Ericsson and allegedly sought financial assistance from Epstein to secure loans and avoid his incarceration. If this is true, then the question is unavoidable. Was India's national security placed at risk to safeguard just the personal financial survival of a private businessman? This is not merely a political issue, if you see. It is a question of India's diplomats, of men and women who have historically upheld India's interest with professionalism and restraints. Were their capabilities bypassed, or they were just told to do, but the strategy lied somewhere else? Finally, before I leave, one more question. What has become to India's credibility when it appears that Prime Minister's office itself could be accessed and influenced through criminal convicted means? And what does this mean for the credibility of India's armed forces if a financially distressed businessman like Anil Ambani could influence decision affecting the most mission-critical defense assets of the nation? Taken together, the Epstein files just suggest a pattern of abrupt, centralized, reckless decision-making, exposing the vulnerability of Indian state. And as the leader of opposition has alleged, the Prime Minister in all this saga appears to be compromised. Today, the US-India trade deal is tending towards a compromised deal. While more disclosures may yet emerge, but for now, one conclusion is difficult to escape. Many Indians are left with deep and growing distrust, not only of the political leadership, but of the powerful interest and the structure that enable them. The national interest, the very idea of nationalism, repeatedly invoked as the cornerstone of India's strategy, the political strategy, the sentiments, they appear to be dangerously eroded. With those thoughts, with those questions, deep concerns about the real nationalism of India, I leave you until next week. Stay safe, stay informed, dutifully ask questions. At the end of the day, someone has to stand up. Bye for now.
You are listening to 93.9 Dublin South FM.
Broadcasting from the Dundrum Town Centre. This is Dublin South FM.